April 6, 1945. The massive Japanese battleship Yamato sliced through the waters of the inland sea, its 18-inch guns, the largest ever mounted on a warship, pointing defiantly toward the horizon. Captain Kosaku Aruga stood on the bridge, his weathered face betraying no emotion as he gazed upon what the Imperial Japanese Navy had once called the unsinkable fortress. The 72 Hydrozotan behemoth represented Japan's ultimate naval achievement, with armor plating so thick that the crew believed no American shell could ever penetrate it. They had no idea that this very armor, the pride of Japanese naval engineering, had already sealed their fate long before they left port. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the tale of how the mightiest battleship ever built became the perfect target for a new kind of warfare that its designers never anticipated. Lieutenant Commander James Douglas was reviewing reconnaissance photographs aboard the USS Essex, an American aircraft carrier stationed 300 miles east of Okinawa. The images clearly showed the massive silhouette of the Yamato leaving Tokuyama Harbor along with 9 escort vessels. Douglas tapped his finger on the grainy photograph and turned to Admiral Mark Mitcher, commander of Task Force 58. "Sir, that's definitely the Yamato. Intel suggests they're on a one-way mission to Okinawa with only enough fuel for a one-way trip," Douglas said. Mitcher studied the image, his expression unchanged. "What do we know about her armor profile?" "The thickest ever built, sir, up to 26 inches in some sections. The Japanese believe she's unsinkable by conventional naval gunfire," Douglas replied. A thin smile crossed Mitcher's face. "Fortunately, we're not planning to use conventional naval gunfire. Alert all air groups. I want every available Avenger, Hellcat, and Helldiver in the air. That armor makes her slow, and that makes her a perfect target." On the deck below, Lieutenant Roy Brute Harrison was already preparing his TBM Avenger torpedo bomber. At 25, Harrison had already seen more combat than most men would in a lifetime. With 12 confirmed kills and 7 successful torpedo runs, he was considered one of the most experienced pilots in the Essex Air Group. As ground crew loaded his 2 0.0-pound torpedoes, Harrison studied the intelligence briefing on the Yamato. "Look at these specs," he told his gunner, Ensign Mike Doyle. "Length, 862 feet, beam 127 feet, main armament 918, 1-inch guns with a range of 26 miles. But what's really interesting is this: maximum speed 27 knots. That's what's going to kill her." Doyle glanced at the brief. "That and our torpedoes. The Japs put so much armor on her that she can't outrun our planes," Harrison continued. "All that protection just makes her a bigger, slower target." Meanwhile, on the Yamato, Seaman First Class Hiroshi Tanaka was stationed deep within the vessel's armored citadel. At just 19, Tanaka had enlisted in the Imperial Japanese Navy 2 years earlier, filled with stories of Japanese naval supremacy and the invincibility of ships like the Yamato. The son of a steelworker from Kobe, Tanaka had been particularly proud when assigned to the pride of the fleet. "Did you hear the Admiral's speech?" asked Petty Officer Masato Ito, who manned the station next to Tanaka. "We're going to the Sea of Heaven. That means we're not coming back." Tanaka nodded solemnly. Earlier that morning, Vice Admiral Seiichi Ito had addressed the crew, explaining their mission, Operation Tengo. They were to sail to Okinawa, beach the Yamato, and use her massive guns to support Japanese forces fighting American troops on the island. With only enough fuel for a one-way journey, the implication was clear. This was a suicide mission. "At least we go in the mightiest ship ever built," Tanaka replied, running his hand along the steel bulkhead. "These walls are thicker than any American shell can penetrate." Ito gave him a skeptical look. "It's not their shells I'm worried about." At 600 hours on April 7th, The American reconnaissance planes first spotted the Yamato battle group approximately 200 miles southwest of Kyushu. By 1000 hours, Admiral Mitchell had authorized the launch of 280 aircraft in waves from the carriers of Task Force 58. The largest airstrike ever mounted against a single naval target was underway. Commander David McCampbell, the Navy's leading ace with 34 aerial victories, led the first wave of fighters and bombers from the USS Essex. "Remember, she's big and she's slow," McCampbell told his pilots over the radio, "but she's also got more anti-aircraft guns than we've ever faced. Her armor won't matter against our torpedoes if we hit her below the waterline. Stay low, stay fast, and don't get fixated on those big guns." Lieutenant Harrison's squadron was among the first wave. As they approached the Yamato from the south, the massive silhouette of the battleship grew on the horizon. Even from miles away, the Yamato's size was intimidating. "Jesus," muttered Doyle from the gunner's position. "It's like attacking a floating island." Harrison checked his instruments one last time. "Remember our briefing. The Yamato has 150 anti-aircraft guns, but most are effective only at high altitudes. We're going in at wave-top level, where their fire control systems are less effective." Statistical analysis had proven this approach. American intelligence had calculated that the Yamato's anti-aircraft batteries could throw up approximately 13 tons of shells per minute. Impressive, but against aircraft approaching from multiple directions at different altitudes, the effectiveness dropped dramatically. American production statistics were even more overwhelming. In 1944 alone, American factories had produced more aircraft than Japan had built during the entire war. Aboard the Yamato, the first radar warning came at 1220 hours. Captain Aruga ordered all hands to battle stations and for the ship to increase speed to its maximum 27 knots. But both he and Admiral Ito knew that this was futile. They were still 300 miles from Okinawa's shores, in open water, with nowhere to hide a ship the size of the Yamato. "Radar contacts! Multiple groups approaching from the northeast and southeast," reported Lieutenant Commander Noboru Ishikawa from the bridge. Admiral Ito studied the plot board as small markers representing American aircraft approached from multiple directions. "They're using their superior numbers to attack from all sides simultaneously. Our gunners won't be able to concentrate fire effectively." "We should request air support from land bases," suggested Ishikawa. "There is none to send," Ito replied quietly. "Every available aircraft is committed to the Okinawa defense or kamikaze operations." On the main deck, anti-aircraft gunner, Petty Officer Kenji Sugura watched the sky anxiously. At 23, he had already survived the sinking of the cruiser Mikuma at Midway. He knew what American air power could do. "They're coming in low," he warned the men at his battery. "Depress the guns. Don't waste ammunition shooting at the sky." The first American fighters appeared as tiny specks on the horizon, growing rapidly as they approached. The Yamato's anti-aircraft batteries opened fire, filling the sky with black puffs of exploding shells. The noise was deafening, a continuous thunder that made verbal communication impossible. Commander Jack Riggs led the first strike of Helldiver dive bombers from the USS Hornet. From 12 Iwo feet, he could see the entire Japanese formation, with the massive Yamato at its center. "Look at that," he radioed to his squadron. "They're in a defensive circle, classic battleship tactics against other surface ships. They still don't get it." Indeed, the Japanese battle group had formed a protective ring around the Yamato, with destroyers and cruisers positioned to maximize their combined anti-aircraft coverage. It was a formation designed for a different era of naval warfare, one where battleships fought battleships with big guns at ranges of 20 miles or more. Riggs dive bombers began their attack runs, plunging steeply toward the Yamato from 12 suzerain feet. The Japanese anti-aircraft fire intensified, but the American pilots had been thoroughly briefed on the limitations of Japanese fire control systems. They knew that the Yamato's Type 94 high-angle directors were optimized for targets flying straight and level, not diving at changing angles. Remember, she's got armor designed to stop 16-inch shells, but that doesn't help against bombs hitting her decks from above, Riggs reminded his pilots. Aim for the superstructure and the deck near the gun turrets. The first bomb struck at 12:32 hours. A 1,000-pound armor-piercing bomb penetrated the deck near the Yamato's No. 2 main turret, exploding deep inside the ship. The deck armor, so effective against horizontal shell fire, proved inadequate against bombs falling from directly overhead. Inside the Yamato's citadel, Seaman Tanaka felt the ship shudder as the first bombs hit. The lights flickered momentarily, then stabilized. Around him, other sailors exchanged nervous glances, but discipline held. "Those American bombs can't penetrate our main armor belt," insisted Petty Officer Ito, though his voice lacked conviction. The ship was built to withstand much worse. But naval architects on both sides of the Pacific had recognized a fundamental truth that many sailors had not. The era of the battleship was over. The aircraft carrier had rendered these floating fortresses obsolete. The very attributes that made the Yamato formidable in a gun duel, its massive size, thick armor, and heavy armament, made it vulnerable to air attack. It was simply too big to hide, too slow to flee, and its armor, while impressive against naval shells, was ineffective against attacks from above and below the waterline. As the first wave of dive bombers pulled away, Lieutenant Harrison's torpedo bombers began their approach. Flying just 50 feet above the waves, they were barely visible to the Japanese gunners until they were nearly upon the Yamato. "We're coming in from multiple angles," Harrison radioed to his squadron. "Remember your training. The Yamato draws almost 36 feet of water. Our torpedoes are set to run at 20 feet. That gives us a large target profile." The American planes approached in small groups from different directions, forcing the Yamato's gunners to divide their fire. This was a deliberate tactic developed through years of combat experience and statistical analysis of Japanese anti-aircraft capabilities. American intelligence had calculated that a single Japanese ship could effectively engage no more than 8 to 10 aircraft simultaneously. With 280 American planes in the air, the outcome was a mathematical certainty. From his position on the portside anti-aircraft mount, Petty Officer Sugiura watched in horror as the torpedo planes skimmed over the waves toward the Yamato. "There are too many," he shouted, though his voice was lost in the roar of gunfire. His 25-milliliter battery fired continuously, the spent brass casings piling around his feet. Occasionally, an American plane would erupt in flames and crash into the sea, but for each one shot down, 5 more seemed to appear. At 12:40 hours, the first torpedoes struck the Yamato's portside. The massive ship shuddered as explosions tore through its underwater hull. The torpedo defense system, multiple layers of armored bulkheads and liquid-filled compartments designed to absorb explosive force, initially performed as intended, but the sheer number of torpedoes overwhelmed even this sophisticated defense. Lieutenant Commander Ishikawa reported damage to the bridge. 3 torpedo hits on the port side, Admiral. Flooding in compartments 5 through 12. Damage control teams are responding, but we're taking on water faster than the pumps can handle. Captain Aruga studied the damage reports with a grim expression. "What is our current list?" 5 degrees to port, sir. Increasing slowly. Admiral Ito stared at the plotboard, where dozens of American aircraft continued to circle like vultures. "Have we shot down any of their planes?" "Our gunners report approximately 10 confirmed kills," Ishikawa replied. "But there are too many, and they keep coming from different directions." Ito nodded slowly. The Imperial Japanese Navy had built the Yamato on the premise that quality could overcome quantity. The Americans had responded by producing such overwhelming quantity that quality became irrelevant. Below decks, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Seaman Tanaka had been ordered to join a damage control party addressing flooding in a forward compartment. As he made his way through narrowing corridors, the ship's list becoming more pronounced, he was struck by a terrible irony. The Yamato's massive armor plating, designed to protect the vessel, was now accelerating its demise. Each ton of steel added to the ship's weight, making it that much harder to keep afloat once the hull had been breached. "We need more pumps on the port side," shouted Lieutenant Hiroshi Nakamura, the damage control officer. "The forward torpedo bulkhead is giving way." Tanaka and several other sailors struggled to position portable pumps, but the incoming water was overwhelming. What made it worse was the realization that their own armor was working against them. The same compartmentalization that was supposed to contain flooding also made it difficult to move damage control equipment where it was needed most. On the flight deck of the USS Essex, Intelligence Officer Lieutenant Commander James Douglas was analyzing real-time reports from returning aircraft. "It's working exactly as we predicted," he told Admiral Mitchell. "The Yamato's designers created a ship that could withstand bombardment from another battleship, but in doing so, they made it the perfect target for aircraft." Mitchell nodded. "The Japanese built a fortress. We built an air force." The numbers told the story. The Yamato displaced 72,000 tons and required a crew of 500. For the same resources, Japan could have built 6 fleet carriers and trained hundreds of pilots. The United States, meanwhile, had embraced industrial mass production. In 1944 alone, American shipyards had launched 8 fleet carriers, 8 light carriers, and 84 escort carriers. American factories had produced over 100 Roosevelt aircraft, while training facilities had graduated thousands of pilots. By 13:30 hours, the Yamato had been hit by at least 10 torpedoes and 5 bombs. The massive battleship listed 15 degrees to port, with uncontrollable flooding in multiple compartments. Its speed had been reduced to 18 knots, making it an even easier target for subsequent waves of American aircraft. In the engine room, Chief Engineer Shigeza Tamaki fought a losing battle against the rising water. At 52, Tamaki was one of the oldest men aboard the Yamato. He had overseen the installation of the ship's massive turbines during construction and considered them his life's work. "The port engine is submerged," he reported via sound-powered phone to the bridge. "We're running on starboard engines only. If the list increases to 20 degrees, we'll lose those as well." Captain Aruga acknowledged the report with characteristic stoicism. "Do what you can, Chief. Keep us moving as long as possible." On the bridge, Admiral Ito faced the most difficult decision of his career. With the Yamato clearly doomed, he could either continue the mission, a futile gesture that would result in the loss of all hands, or order the crew to abandon ship, saving thousands of lives but admitting defeat. "Admiral, the list is now 18 degrees and increasing," reported Ishikawa. "Damage control reports that we cannot correct it. The ship will capsize within an hour." Ito closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, his decision was made. "Signal to all escorts. Yamato will continue the mission alone. The escorts are to pick up survivors after we sink." "Sir?" Ishikawa was clearly shocked. "Shouldn't we order abandon ship and let our men be machine-gunned in the water by American aircraft?" Ito asked. "No, better they die inside this steel fortress than defenseless in the ocean." The cruel calculus of Ito's decision was based on previous experience. American pilots had sometimes strafed Japanese sailors in the water after sinking their ships, a violation of the laws of war, but one that had occurred with enough frequency to influence Japanese decision-making. Lieutenant Harrison's Avenger was returning to the Essex after delivering its torpedo, when his radio man spotted the distinctive silhouette of a Japanese Zero fighter approaching from their rear quarter. "Bandit at 6 o'clock high!" shouted Ensign Tom Griffin from the radio compartment. Harrison immediately threw the Avenger into a steep dive, dropping toward the ocean surface where the heavier American plane had an advantage. The Zero followed, its machine guns chattering. "He's good," Harrison muttered as tracers passed just over his canopy. "Doyle, can you get a shot?" In the rear turret, gunner's mate Mike Doyle swung his .50 caliber machine gun toward the pursuing Zero. "I've got him in my sights, but he's staying high, just out of range." The Japanese pilot was Lieutenant Yoshio Kamikawa, one of the few remaining veteran aviators in the Japanese Navy. With 3 years of combat experience, Kamikawa had survived when most of his peers had perished. He recognized the American torpedo bomber and knew it had likely just attacked the Yamato. For the Emperor and the Yamato, Kamikawa whispered to himself as he pushed his Zero into a steeper dive, closing the distance to the American plane. His cannon opened fire, striking the Avenger's left wing. Harrison felt his aircraft shudder as cannon shells tore through the wing. "We're hit!" he shouted. "Doyle, I need that Zero off our tail now." Doyle fired a sustained burst from his turret, the heavy .50 caliber slugs ripping into the Zero's lightweight frame. The Japanese fighter's engine began to smoke, then burst into flames. "Got him!" Doyle exulted, watching as the Zero rolled inverted, then plunged into the ocean. There was no parachute. "Good shooting," Harrison acknowledged, assessing the damage to his own aircraft. "But we've got problems of our own. We're leaking fuel, and the port aileron is damaged. Not sure we'll make it back to the carrier." This individual drama was being repeated across the battlespace as Japanese and American aviators dueled above the doomed Yamato. But the outcome was never in doubt. For every Japanese aircraft that rose to defend the battleship, the Americans could field 10. By 1400 hours, the Yamato situation had become catastrophic. The ship listed 27 degrees to port, making it impossible to operate most of the anti-aircraft guns. Fires raged throughout the vessel, and several massive explosions had occurred as American bombs found their way to secondary ammunition storage areas. In the forward damage control station, Seaman Tanaka and his team had been forced to abandon their efforts as seawater filled the compartment. They retreated up ladders and through hatches, the ship's extreme list making movement difficult. "What do we do now?" asked a young sailor named Sato, panic evident in his voice. Tanaka looked at the frightened faces around him. Most were young men like himself, barely out of their teens. They had been told the Yamato was unsinkable, that its armor would protect them. Now that same armor was dragging them to the bottom of the East China Sea. "We follow orders," Tanaka replied, though he wondered if any coherent command structure remained. "We head to secondary damage control stations." As they made their way aft, Tanaka was struck by the contrast between the Yamato's immaculate construction and its current state of devastation. Passageways designed with mathematical precision were now warped and buckled. Systems engineered to the highest standards lay in ruins. The pride of Japanese naval architecture had been undone not by a failure of design, but by a failure of strategic vision. On the bridge, Admiral Ito and Captain Aruga stood silently as the ship's list approached 30 degrees. Both men understood what was happening. The Yamato's massive armor belt, concentrated along the waterline to protect against shellfire, had become a deadly liability. As torpedoes breached the hull below the armored belt, seawater rushed in. The immense weight of the armor then accelerated the ship's roll toward the breach side, exposing the unarmored bottom to additional torpedo attacks. It was a fatal design flaw that no amount of engineering could overcome. At 14:20 hours, with the Yamato listing at 35 degrees and capsizing imminent, Captain Aruga finally gave the order, "Abandon ship, all hands to the starboard side." The announcement spread through the vessel's still-functioning communication systems. Some crew members, indoctrinated with the Bushido code that death was preferable to surrender, chose to remain at their stations. Others scrambled toward the starboard side, hoping to jump clear before the ship rolled over. In his damage control party, Tanaka heard the order and felt a momentary relief, followed immediately by dread. The ocean offered little more safety than the dying ship. "Come on," he urged his companions. "We need to get out before she rolls." As they fought their way up staircases that had become nearly horizontal due to the list, Tanaka caught glimpses through portholes of American aircraft still circling overhead. The attack continued, even as the Yamato was clearly sinking. On the starboard side upper deck, hundreds of sailors gathered, preparing to jump into the sea. The ship's list was now so extreme that the port side was underwater, while the starboard rail towered high above the waves. "Jump clear of the ship," ordered Lieutenant Commander Takanobu Mito. "She'll create a massive suction when she goes down. Swim as far away as you can." Tanaka helped several injured sailors reach the rail, then looked back at the massive superstructure of the Yamato. Black smoke poured from multiple fires, and the main gun turrets, once capable of hurling 3 200-pound shells more than 26 miles, were silent and impotent. All that engineering, all that armor, all that firepower, rendered useless by aircraft carrying bombs and torpedoes that cost a fraction of what a single main gun shell cost. At 14:23 hours, as Tanaka prepared to jump, a massive explosion tore through the Yamato's midsection. Later analysis would suggest that fires had reached the main magazine, detonating thousands of pounds of powder charges for the main guns. The explosion was so powerful it was visible from 100 miles away, creating a mushroom cloud that rose 4 miles into the sky. Tanaka was hurled into the sea by the force of the blast. When he surfaced, coughing and disoriented, the Yamato was gone. Where the mightiest battleship ever built had sailed just moments before, there was only churning water filled with debris and struggling sailors. Lieutenant Harrison's damaged Avenger was still 50 miles from the Essex when his port engine failed completely. "We're not going to make it back to the carrier," he informed his crew. "Prepare for water landing." As he struggled to keep the aircraft level with only one functioning engine, Harrison spotted a small American destroyer below. "This is Avenger 21 to any U.S. Navy vessel. We are damaged and going down. Request rescue support." The destroyer USS Harding acknowledged the call. "Avenger 21, this is USS Harding. We see you. We'll be standing by for rescue. Can you ditch near our position?" Harrison brought the Avenger down in a controlled water landing 500 yards from the destroyer. Within minutes, the Harding had launched a whaleboat and recovered all 3 aviators. On the destroyer's deck, Harrison watched as other American aircraft returned to their carriers. The strike against the Yamato had been devastatingly effective, with minimal American losses. "How many planes did we lose?" Harrison asked the destroyer's executive officer. "Early reports say about 10 aircraft out of 280, replied Lieutenant Commander William Rensford. "We sank the largest battleship ever built and lost fewer men than they lost in a single turret crew." The statistical asymmetry was staggering. The Yamato had carried approximately 300 sailors. Of those, only 280 would survive. American losses totaled 12 aircraft and 10 airmen. It was the most lopsided exchange of the naval war. 6 days later, in a debriefing room aboard the USS Essex, Lieutenant Commander Douglas presented his analysis to the carrier group commanders. "The Yamato operation demonstrates the complete obsolescence of the battleship as a capital ship," Douglas explained, pointing to diagrams on the wall. The Japanese invested 8 years and vast resources building a vessel designed to fight World War I-style gun duels. We invested in carriers and aircraft designed to project power across hundreds of miles. He indicated a chart showing comparative industrial output. While Japan poured steel and labor into 2 super battleships, the Yamato and Musashi, we mass-produced aircraft carriers, destroyers, and planes. By 1944, we were building more naval vessels in a month than Japan could build in a year. Admiral Mitchell nodded approvingly. The Yamato's armor made it the perfect target, slow, unmaneuverable, and impossible to hide. A monument to an obsolete form of warfare. In the South Pacific, seaman Hiroshi Tanaka found himself aboard an American hospital ship. One of the few Yamato survivors, he had been plucked from the water by an American destroyer and was now receiving treatment for burns and a broken arm. Through an interpreter, an American naval intelligence officer questioned him about his experiences aboard the Yamato. "Did you believe the ship was unsinkable?" asked Lieutenant John Roberts. Tanaka considered the question carefully. "We were told it was, that its armor was too thick for any shell to penetrate. And now I understand that the armor that was supposed to protect us actually made us a target," Tanaka replied. "Your planes didn't need to penetrate the main armor belt. They just needed to hit us where we weren't protected, or make us so heavy that we would sink under our own weight." The American nodded sympathetically. "That's the tragedy of the Yamato. It was obsolete before it was even launched." After the war, naval architects and military strategists from both sides studied the Yamato's fate. The conclusions were unanimous. The age of the battleship had ended. Naval power would now be projected through aircraft carriers, operating hundreds of miles from their targets. The Yamato represented the pinnacle of battleship design, but also its last gasp. Its massive guns, capable of hurling shells weighing as much as a small car, never fired a single shot at an American ship. Its unprecedented armor, designed to withstand the heaviest naval artillery, proved useless against attacks from above and below. Perhaps most ironically, the very attributes that made the Yamato seem formidable, its size, armor, and firepower, made it the perfect target for a new kind of warfare. Too big to hide, too slow to flee, and too heavily armored to remain buoyant once its hull was breached, the Yamato became a symbol not of Japanese naval power, but of its strategic miscalculation. In the decades that followed, naval warfare would continue to evolve. Aircraft carriers would eventually be supplemented by nuclear submarines and guided missile destroyers. But the lesson of the Yamato remained relevant. Adaptation is more valuable than armor. Flexibility more important than firepower, and strategic vision more crucial than engineering excellence. For Hiroshi Tanaka, who would return to Japan in 1946 and eventually become a shipbuilding engineer, the lesson was deeply personal. He would dedicate his career to designing vessels that emphasize speed, maneuverability, and purpose-specific capabilities rather than all-purpose invulnerability. The Yamato taught us that nothing is unsinkable, he would later write in his memoirs. It taught us that armor can become a liability if it makes you too heavy to maneuver or too expensive to produce in numbers. Most importantly, it taught us that no amount of steel can protect against an enemy who changes the rules of engagement. The ultimate legacy of the Yamato was not as a weapon of war, but as a cautionary tale of military inflexibility. By investing so heavily in battleship technology, the Imperial Japanese Navy had effectively armored itself against the last war while remaining vulnerable to the current one. The result was not only the loss of a magnificent vessel, but also the lives of thousands of sailors who believed in its invulnerability. As naval historian Samuel Eliot Morison would later write, the Yamato was a perfect metaphor for Imperial Japan itself. Impressive in appearance, formidable in close combat, but ultimately unable to adapt to a changing world. Its armor, like Japan's military traditions, provided illusory security while actually hastening its demise. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.